Welcome to this video where I will show you how to complete the finishing work on drywall. A wall that in a previous video we taped and got prepped for the finish coats that we're going to put on before we sand this and get it primed and ready for painting. I suspect you clicked on this video because if you're like me, you like doing projects yourself and learning how to do new things and getting that personal satisfaction of accomplishing something like this on your own. I'm going to walk through all the steps, so follow along as I do that, as we take this wall from this rough prepared surface to a nearly finished surface like this with all the joints covered, ready for sanding and prime, and have a finished basement wall. So come on along as we do that. Let's get started. In the previous video, we left this wall in a state where the screws had been covered and the joints had been rough taped. Well, now we need to cover those up with what we call a fill coat. Let that dry, smooth it off a little bit if we have to, and then put a final, with the wide knife, finish coat on here. Takes a little while to do that. You've got to do this first coat, let it dry enough that you can come in and do the second coat. It's all going to depend on how warm it is, how humid it is. So we're going to begin by doing a little preparation before we do that fill coat of going over these surfaces. And what I do is I just take the knife and I move it along on where the screws are covered, move it along where I have the tape joints, and knock down any rough ridges or edges that'll be on there. I don't plan to do any sanding at this point because I was careful to put the mud on thin enough that I don't have to sand. I just need to knock down any ridges, and then we're going to start putting in the fill coat. The secret, if there is one, as to how well these remaining steps go of filling and finishing the mud on this wall boils down to, once again, how much mud you apply. And the problem I see a lot of people have when I've talked to them about it is they use way too much mud. You've got the tape set now. You've got the initial fill done. You don't need a lot of mud. You're just trying to make it disappear, make it smooth, so you don't see any humps in the wall. Now, I'm going to start up here on the ceiling. And the reason I'm starting up here is I want this to be in place and starting to dry while I go on and do these other seams, these vertical seams. And once that's dry, I can come back and I can finish this other side of that corner. With this set up, I won't be scraping it and making problems for myself later on. So we're going to get this going first before we do the other taping, and you can see, or the other mudding, and you can see I'm not putting a lot of mud on there. I'm just getting some started within my reach. Get my knife way in the corner so I'm working my way out. Use that striker edge on the trough, and now just guide my medium knife along the edge, and I've got a nice smooth surface. I'll just keep working my way down till I get that all filled in. Now when I come back into the surface, I angle my knife and bring it in so I don't leave a mark. Just guide this along. Now again, like I talked about earlier video, the ceiling is uneven. It gives me some bumps that I have to deal with, so I have to add a little bit of extra mud there. We start down at the end here. Smooth this on the way down. It's a little bit of artwork doing this. You want to apply enough pressure to push this stuff down. And with that, we have the fill coat put on the top of that ceiling seam. Now we can go ahead and do the vertical seams. The key here is to have your taping knife at a good angle so you're not cutting, you're not pushing. And keep enough pressure to smooth that out. One thing you want to do early on in the process, I did that ceiling joint, but I also want to get another coat on these screw heads, because you might have seen from the shadow in the video that there was quite a bit of shrink back on those screw heads. We got to get that filled again. It'll probably shrink back a little more before we do the final finish coat on this. And again, get it filled, not too much mud. Get the mud smoothed all the way around it. And you don't have any edges sticking up, and you can just come back through and lightly sand it if you need to and get a finish coat on it. That takes care of the fill coat on this section of wall. Everything except I have to finish this up along the ceiling. But other than that, I've got the screw heads covered and the vertical joints are covered. Now we'll go ahead and do that other wall. Now with these butt joints, it doesn't go quite as slick as it does with these factory joints here, where you've got the indent for the tape. We are going to have to really do some smoothing and widening out to make this come out even. But for right now, I do need to get the initial fill coat on, fill any imperfections. So again, I'm going to just apply small amount over the top to fill any dips or indents, but not a lot of mud. Just enough to cover the surface, even it out. What makes this harder to do is that that tape is out a little ways from the wall, even though I cut a little bit of a trough there. So when I try to smooth over that fill coat, it exposes the tape, as you saw there. So I put extra mud on and then very lightly went along, and I can still see a faint hint of the tape under there, but I do have a fill coat. And when I come back in to do the finish coat, that wider taper will smooth that out on both sides and finish covering that up. And I'll take care of this little bit here when I do the taping on the side. Now this is going to have to dry a little while before I come and do the butt joint on the side. I'm going to go ahead and fill all the screw heads on the rest of this wall and fill in the seams here on the factory joints and let these top ones dry a little bit and then come back and do the sides for those butt joints. Fill coat is done on the wall in the back room and out here on this big wall. Now I have to wait for this all to dry and set up really well and come back and we will put that finish coat on. The fill coat's had a day to dry. Had several things going on yesterday, so did not get at any of this, and now it's more than dry, ready to go to put the top or fill coat, whatever you want to call it, on this. We're going to do that with combination of both the medium and the wide taping knife, depending on which part of the wall we're doing. Before I start that, however, I'd like to take a moment to ask if you've enjoyed the video up to this point and this series on doing this wall repair, that you please consider clicking like and subscribing to our channel, and that'll let you know when we do more of these types of videos so you don't miss any of them. With that, let's get on with getting the rest of the work done on this and getting the finish coat on and getting this wall done. I've already taken the liberty to take medium taping knife and go along the wall, both of these walls, and knock down any rough spots, any little bits of mud that stuck to the wall, any really sharp edges on these joints. Same thing I did after I got the tape bedded in and cleaned it up before I put the fill coat down. So that's really all I needed to do. I don't do any sanding at this point yet, because it makes no sense to put mud on and then sand it all off and put more mud over the top. By being very careful how you apply these coats and getting them on thin enough on the edges, you don't need to do that. You just come back in and put the next coat on. We're going to do the finish coat process in about the same order as we did the fill process, and I'm going to start on the ceiling up here, so that has a chance to set up a little bit, so later I can come in and do along the wall at the edge of the ceiling. On this, I'm going to stick with the medium knife, except what I'm going to do now is extend that mud out a little bit further and try not to drop too much on the floor. But now we're trying to extend that area to get a taper. And the reason I'm not using the wide knife here is because, remember, this is dividing in half the section that's got to be top coated. Whereas when I do the wall joints, I've got to cover a much wider width, both halves of that, and then I'll use the wide knife. So for this, medium knife, get some mud put on there so that I don't keep dropping it on the floor. I oftentimes just strike the mud off the edges there, so when I spread this out, I don't have a gob at the end of the edge of the knife here that falls on the floor like that one little chunk did. So I guess I don't get any bonus points for that one. Get this extended out. Scrape the excess off. Be nice if I was a little taller. And there, we have the start of a finish coat on the ceiling. We'll go down and finish out the rest of this, and we'll get on to the next section. Notice again when I start back in, get the tip of the knife here and roll it into the mud so I don't get a cut in there. It makes it nice and smooth as you pull it along. And we have the fill coat on the ceiling. Projects like this are great in the winter, especially here in Wisconsin. 1 below last night after a cold day yesterday. Today, high expected in the low 20s, 14 degrees right now, and no better place to be than in the basement doing a project like this. But I do need to get this stuff done pretty soon because spring is coming and my spring list is starting to grow. So we got to get at this and get it finished. So we're going to do my least favorite part of doing finish work, and that is butt joint. They are sometimes very tough to get even, and even though I'm going to put a coat on here, I've got a suspicion that it won't be my last touch on this. I may have to sand it a little bit and do just a little more touch up on it, because you're trying to get as thin as possible and yet at the same time get this covered out wide enough so you don't see a hump. So let's see how we do. Again, this time I am using the wide knife, so I know about how wide I need this. I'm going to start up here just below that mark, spread it out to here to get the mud on the wall. Just going to get some on the edge of the knife over here to fill this spot in. At this edge there will be a piece of oak board for trim that'll cover part of this, and the corner piece for this edge extends down into here where this framing lumber is. Makes it a little more interesting. So let's get the rest of this mud on and see how we do. Getting this joint covered up. All right. I'll start here and try to guide this up as well as I can around that corner and get some pressure on here with a good flat angle and spread that mud out. Took quite a bit off with that pass, which I expected. Get it evened out. Now we got to start smoothing. You got to keep a lot of pressure on that knife and keep it at a really flat angle. Still got quite a bit of mud on there. I got some air pockets. Making some progress now. In the process I picked up a little bit of dry material, and that made a little track there. Now I'm going to sweep into here to get that little spot. If you're again, that process, you kind of sweep the knife into it and pull it across, you can smooth that. I'm not worried about this spot here because that's going to get vertical taping on that joint. That's about all I'm going to try to do here. If I try to do any more, I'm just going to create problems for myself. One of the things I found is oftentimes on these, especially a tough spot like this, is I get all done and I get it primed. After I've sanded it, I get it primed. I'll find a little dimple here and there. So after it's primed, I'll just touch up a little bit of mud, smooth it in there, and put a little more primer on it. And these will usually work out. I'm going to come down here and quickly get this one as well. And the reason I'm doing these two is, again, give them a chance to dry. And while they're drying, I can go back over that big wall and start doing those vertical joints. So let's get some mud on this one too. This one is a little longer, gives me a little more room to work. It's going a little bit easier. Got a little light in here. Get that topped off. With a knife at a good flat angle. Bring it across with a lot of pressure. Get that mud spread out. Again, that's as good as I'm going to try to get it. I mess with it anymore and I'm just going to goof it up. We'll let that dry. If we have some imperfections, we'll come back later and fill those in. The ceiling is set up well enough that I can start here on this. Now I've got little bits of mud that came off from the knife that are along the side here. I'm not doing this part right next to the ceiling yet, but I want to get these knocked off of here before I start trying to do this fill coat on the vertical joints. Okay, so always keep a little putty knife with you to do that sort of thing. If you see a little spot, you can knock it off before it gets into your mud and causes problems. Well, once again, same thing. I just take a little off of the edges here. And I'm going to get a start just a little bit below where that finish coat is going to be on that joint up here by the ceiling, because we're going to be putting mud in there to fill that. So I don't need to get really close. Again, you're looking roughly how wide your knife is. Get some mud spread out that width. Just start working your way down, filling it in. Here I've got a little problem with a pocket. Get that. Get down off the ladder so I can get some more of this filled in. I can reach that now. I just wanted to be up there with the ladder to start filling that where I could reach it. Again, watch the width of the knife. Get some mud started. Always being careful to get enough on there, but not too much. Got a little thin right here. Because remember, when you pull that knife down on here, you're trying to get it very thin at the edges. Work it out from the middle. Get the rest of this on here. See where you end up with a little gap, fill some mud in there, so another pass you can smooth that out. Instead of going to the gym, get yourself a job doing drywall work. Now there'll be a little ripple here and there. That'll come out when I sand this, but I basically have a nice tapered edge along both sides now. Not too much mud. Very thin. That'll make a nice finished surface. So I'm going to go on, do the rest of the vertical joints, and then we'll finish off these screws and that part up by the ceiling. You saw there, I picked up a little speck of something on the way down and made a scratch there. Oh, I gotta fill that in a little bit, a little cross stroke. I got a little too much mud over here. Just clean that up before I do another pressure down stroke. Come across the bottom, leave a little mark that I can sand out. And we've got that one done. Again, this thing on the bottom, just hit that with a taping knife or a putty knife, or hit it with a sander later to clean that up. It's going to be underneath the base mold anyway, so it's not as fussy. You want to concentrate on getting this right. Trusty old taping knives. These have been with me a lot. When I had rental property, I would get done work, and sometimes in between tenants have to fix up a wall, and I'd be working with these till 10 o'clock at night. Vertical joints, butt joints on the end, and the screw heads are finish coated on this wall. So again, with a medium knife, now that this is drier, I am going to do this joint between the wall and the ceiling. And again, we're going to spread this out a little further than we did when we did the fill coat. Start over on this end. I'm going to strike a little bit of this mud off so I get a little better, cleaner start. Spread that out. And just work my way along. Make sure I get all the way up into that corner. Keep the knife flat, keep a lot of pressure on it, and you will be pulling away some mud. Bring that cover line out. And one more pass here. Being very careful about keeping that upper edge of that upper corner of that knife up there in the corner between the wall and the ceiling. So that fills in properly. And we'll just keep working our way down. We have the top fill or top cover coat done between the wall and the ceiling. The last piece we have to do is finish covering these screws. Now I taped them initially, shrunk back quite a bit. I put more on and that pretty much filled those in. Now we've got to make this smooth. So what I always do for that last cover coat is I just make a narrow band of mud across there with the medium knife and work that down so I have just one straight line to sand the edges on. And that has always seemed to be the easiest thing for me to do. So we'll get that put on here. Some of that extra mud off and just smooth it out. It gives you a smoother look because you don't have the chance of those little bulges where the screws were showing up. that's where we're going to end this video with getting that much done. I'm going to let this dry and set up really well. The next step will be to come back, light sand in spots to get rid of any sharp edges on here, to smooth this out. Look for any little defects or divots in the mud, and believe me, that happens. I'm not perfect. I don't do enough of this to do it perfect, and I'm certainly not speedy like a professional contractor would be, but for the most part it'll be in pretty good shape. And then we will prime it and check again for defects and get it ready for paint in the next video. So thank you for watching, and once again, if you enjoyed this, click like and consider subscribing to our channel. So until next time, enjoy your projects and take care.